Yes.
Can you hear me at the back? Thank you. How are you?
Very cold.
It's cold.
Yes.
Wet. Well, I want to say thank you very much to you for coming, and thank you to the learners. A special welcome to the learners who are here. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate the turnout because when I arrived at Port Elizabeth Airport, it was raining, and Mr. Tangi Mzizi was there to fetch me, and he drove for the next 2 hours in that rain and the cold, and I wondered if any of you would be here. So I'm delighted to see you. And I want to thank in particular Professor Sizwe Mabizela for his very generous welcome on behalf of the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Dadaf. I really appreciate the welcome to Rhodes University. I feel very honored to be here. I feel honored to contribute towards your institutional and personal commitment to this issue. But before I talk about that, I want to tell you a bit about Professor Mabizela. He really likes Rhodes. And he really likes Grahamstown. And the reason I know about it is that when I was chairman of council at Wits and Professor Louisa Nonma was vice-chancellor, he still is vice-chancellor, but I'm no longer chairman of council, we tried to recruit him. And he said no to us. That's the only thing I've got against you, Professor Mabizela. It means he really loves being here, so I think that's the only thing. So thank you very much for inviting me. Ladies and gentlemen, did you hear that big long CB? Did you hear it? It doesn't help. It really doesn't help. It doesn't help to have degrees, to have education, to have honors, to have books, to have learning, because in the end we are all vulnerable. We are vulnerable to fear, and to cold, and to hunger, and to aloneness, and to disease. And that's what I want to talk to you about, which is our vulnerability. AIDS makes us very vulnerable. This epidemic has been with us now, as far as we know, for 31 years. The first time that doctors and epidemiologists gave a name to it, or started realizing that it was taking root, was in May 1981. And the first thing that happened was fear. Fear and ignorance and stigma. And the reason for the stigma was very difficult to understand, because they didn't know initially how this virus was transmitted, what it did in the human body, how it was conveyed to other people. And there was a president in America at that time called Ronald Reagan. And for the first 7 years of the epidemic, he never mentioned the word AIDS. And that was because of the stigma. The central defining feature of the political and social response to this epidemic has been stigma. And I'm going to explain that to you so that we can understand how stigma informs all of our responses and how we can deal with it. Now, I encountered that stigma very personally. As Professor Mabizela told you, in the 1980s, I was a human rights lawyer. It was a difficult time, but it was an interesting time and a challenging time to be a lawyer in South Africa. I was working at Center for Applied Legal Studies at Wits. We were doing wonderful cases, interesting, difficult, challenging cases. I was a young man in my early 30s, and I was diagnosed with HIV. It happened in December 1986. And it was the end of my life. I would never turn 40. I would never see a democratic South Africa. I would never become a judge under a constitution. I was going to die within a few years. So it was a terrible thing. It was a terribly shocking, distressing thing, because in the mid-1980s, there was nothing they could do for someone diagnosed with AIDS. At that point in America, the death toll had already reached 250,000. We didn't know it properly yet, but at that that stage, the death toll on our continent, in the central Great Lakes region of our continent, was probably higher already. So it was a disease of death. But worse than the shock of having a fatal diagnosis was the sense of stigma, the shock of stigma. I can't tell you persuasively enough. I was horrified to have a fatal diagnosis, but I also felt ashamed. I felt ashamed to have a virus in my body that was such a reviled, demeaned, and stigmatized virus that everyone dreaded, everyone hated to have, everyone ostracized, as Professor Mabuzela has said. Now I want to explain to you why I felt so ashamed. And it's an important part of our understanding of this disease because it's about sexuality and sexual functioning. On the way here, Mr. Mzizi was talking to me about Xhosa culture. And he says it's difficult to talk about sex in Xhosa culture. Is that right? But we must talk about it. And I'm going to talk about sexual functioning, and it's going to be difficult for you. You're going to feel uncomfortable. Here I am, a judge, talking about sexual function. You want to hear about my sexual function?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm a gay man. I didn't want to be a gay man. I discovered when I was 14, Mr. Mzizi asked me in the car this morning. When I was 14, I heard a radio program, and I knew that was me. And I didn't want it. I fought against it until I was 30. I dated girls, I got involved with women, I got married. I didn't want to be gay. And I say all of that to you, because if there's anyone here who says that gay is a choice, I can tell you it's not a choice. Any of you heterosexual, have you chosen to be heterosexual? No. Sexual orientation is like skin color. It's like gender. It's no choice. So I fought against my gayness, but after my marriage failed and after I got divorced, I decided never again. I will never ever apologize again for being what I am. I won't apologize on a black continent for being white. I'm proud of being white. Not because it's better than being black, but because it's the way I am. And the same with sexual orientation. In a straight world, I will not apologize for being a minority. And the fact is that we now know that in all cultures, Venda, Xhosa, Muslims, conservative Jewish people, North America, South America, Asia, Africa, in every continent, in every culture, in every group, there's a small minority of people, 3 to 5%, who are same-sex oriented. It's not a big issue. In Xhosa culture as well, have you heard of Nicholas Flobo? Who's heard of him? You must have heard of him. He's a famous artist. Have you heard of him?
Yes.
I'm proud of you. He's one of our country's best artists. He's at the Venice Biennale. He's one of the most talented young artists of Africa. He's a proudly gay man, and he's integrating his gayness into his depiction of Xhosa culture. So we know that it's part of your culture as well, that people haven't spoken about it, for the reason Mr. Mzizi gave me, that it's difficult to talk about sex. But that's a diversion. I tell it to you because I was grappling with my sexuality in the 1980s. I came out as a gay man. As Professor Mabuzela has told you, I was determined to fight for gay and lesbian equality under apartheid, together with fighting for racial justice and for democracy. I saw it as one struggle, and then I got HIV. And I felt so ashamed. I thought, how can I do this to my comrades in the human rights movement? I come out as a gay man and then I get the gay disease. And I kept it quiet. I told no one. I couldn't speak to anyone because I felt so ashamed of having this disease. And I thought it was because I got it as a gay man. But I was wrong. I started working with HIV and this epidemic, not because I was gay or because I had HIV. This was a terrible secret. I started working through my trade union work. Professor Mabizela mentioned it. I was working with National Union of Mine Workers, I was working with Kasatu, and I met people very different from myself. I met the wives of mine workers, some of them Xhosa speaking, some of them from Mozambique, some of them from Lesotho. And they came to see me at Wits. And they said to me, I've had one sexual partner in my life, who's my husband, who's a mine worker, and I've got HIV. And I sat there as the lawyer in my secret silence about the fact that I had HIV, and I listened to these women. And they were saying the same things about stigma, that they felt ashamed and scared and contaminated and fearful of their diagnosis. And they feared violence from their husbands and from their communities. And I realized this wasn't about being gay, because they had the same experience of stigma as I had, even though they got it from their husbands. And this thing of stigma is so powerful. It lies at the root of our response to this pandemic, and I think it's to do with sexual transmission. It's what Mr. Mzizi said in the car. It's hard to talk about sex because it is a private thing. It should be a private thing. It's an intimate moment of bodily connection between two people. It should be private, always consensual, always adult, and it should bring joy. And if it's opposite sex connection, it might bring new life. These are beautiful things, aren't they? But when in that moment of bodily connection, we transmit not joy, a new life, but we transmit a virus, there's something very, very difficult and shameful about that. We don't fully understand it. In this whole epidemic, a lot that's been written about stigma is about external stigma. We understand the external stigma, the discrimination. As Mabizela has recommitted your institution to fighting discrimination rightly. What we don't understand are the well springs of stigma inside ourselves. And we're still grappling to understand that. But I think it is to do with sexual transmission. That intimate moment of connection which we all want and need. I hope you all want and need it, ladies and gentlemen.
They're school kids, yeah.
The epidemiologists, I asked Mr. Mzizi in the car, because I tried to get some figures about the Eastern Cape and about Rhodes, and it was not entirely easy. The epidemiologists speak about the sexually active population being between 15 and 49. So anyone who's over 49 doesn't have a sex life anymore. Ladies and gentlemen, I managed after 3 years to start speaking to people, but it took a long time. It was like coming out of a deep freeze. I first spoke to the people who were closest to me. I managed to speak to my family after 3 years, and I eventually started speaking to some more people. But each time it was so difficult. Each time it felt like breaking a secret, fighting against a taboo, crossing a wall. And I mention that because that's still the experience that many people with HIV have. It was a very, very long, slow process. We embarked on a journey towards democracy in the early 1990s. We became a democracy in 1994, and President Mandela appointed me a judge. And it was the biggest ambition of my life, was to become a judge in a democratic, non-racial South Africa. But my virus was catching up on me. And by 1997, I was very, very sick. I had pneumonia, special agent pneumonia in both my lungs. I'd lost 10 or 15 kilograms. I was down to 80 kilograms. I'm a strong man. I weighed 93 kilograms. And the worst was that I had gastrointestinal thrush throughout my mouth and my gastrointestinal system. I couldn't swallow, I couldn't eat. If I could swallow anything, my stomach couldn't digest it. And I was going to die. But I was very lucky. I was very lucky. The year before, in 1996, the doctors announced that there was a way to deal with AIDS, even advanced AIDS, and that was through the combination antiretroviral treatment. It was very, very expensive, but as a judge, I had the privilege of having a salary in a country and a continent where most people at that point were living on less than $1 a day, and I could buy the treatment, I could buy life. And I was spending 4,000 rand a month in 1997. My salary as a judge came to 12,000 rand a month in that time. I was spending 1/3 of it on my treatment. But it was extraordinary. It was absolutely amazing. Within 2 weeks, I knew that my life had been given back to me. I was definitely going to die. I would have been dead within 2.5 years. 30 months, the median survival time of a person in my position, medically well-tended, well-nourished person in his early 40s, who died within 30 months. But I didn't die because of antiretroviral treatment. Within weeks, I knew that this virus was beaten in my body. That was 15 years ago. Next month, November 2012, I will celebrate 15 years of antiretroviral treatment. And I haven't had a detectable viral load for 12 years. It means there's no medical or scientific instrument that can actually find the virus. They can find the antibodies, but there's no active virus in my body. And I say that because I want to come back to the theme of my lecture, ladies and gentlemen. The 4 big things about HIV. And central to all of them is the stigma. We've got to prevent HIV passing on. It's not difficult. It's a difficult virus to transmit. As Professor Mabizela says, we've got to protect those we love. It's not difficult to do. We've got to test. A lot of people have been tested in the Eastern Cape. How many of you have been tested? Please put up your hands. I want to see. That's good. I'm proud of you, but it's not enough. Everyone must be tested. Will Professor Mabizela put up his hand? Did anyone? You must all be tested. Professor Badak must be tested. Mr. Mzizi must be tested. Dr. Basilio must be tested. All learners must be tested. It's just got to be a non-issue. We must be tested, and if we're sexually active, we've got to be tested more than once a year. And the important thing that we've got to get this message out about treatment. I told you when I started, the treatment was immensely expensive. And the treatment action campaign was started in 1998 by an activist called Zaki Ahmed. Have you heard of him? Zaki started the treatment action campaign to tackle the question of drug prices, to tackle the big drug companies. The drug companies had got these patents. A patent is a legal exclusive right to market or to manufacture something. And the drug companies had these patents. The drugs were easy to produce and cheap to produce, but they said, we're not going to let others produce them because we're going to charge thousands and thousands of rand for these drugs. And the treatment action campaign fought that battle, and they won it. The drugs I'm taking now cost only a few hundred rands a year to produce. They won that battle, and it's an important lesson for us as South Africans, because this was a civil society organization that took on an issue. And it took on an issue with good information, with good strategies, with good principles, and with good energy. That's what you need to tackle an issue. But the treatment action campaign didn't realize that there was a bigger nightmare. Who knows what the bigger nightmare was at the end of 1999 and 2000 in South Africa? President Mbeki's denialism. President Mbeki was offended that doctors and scientists were saying there's an epidemic. And the epidemic has hit our continent of Africa the worst and the hardest. It's hit our continent so hard that we are the only continent in the world that has a mass epidemic. of heterosexually transmitted HIV. And he said here at Fort Hare, close by, he said, that means you're telling us that black people in Africa have sex differently from everyone else in the world. Well, he was tragically wrong, ladies and gentlemen. We don't know enough about this virus yet. We know a lot about it. We know more about it than the virus that causes cold and flu. We know more about the HIV virus than we know about any other virus in human history. But what we don't know about the virus is exactly why some populations are more vulnerable to it than others. And the big mistake President Mbeki made was to look at race. He didn't understand that the HIV epidemic in Africa isn't among black people, it's amongst Bantu-speaking people. There's no epidemic in West Africa. The highest national prevalence in West Africa is around about 4%. Even though they've got the same issues as we've got, lack of health care, trade routes, dislocation, migration, there have been wars in Cote d'Ivoire, other parts of West Africa, Mali. So my belief, and I'm not a virologist, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an epidemiologist, my belief is that someone will discover, and some of the doctors are now saying this, I'm pleased to say, that there's a genetic vulnerability in the Bantu-speaking peoples of Central and Southern Africa that makes them as susceptible to HIV infection as gay men are. For specific physiological reasons, gay men are the receptive partner in a gay relationship, intercourse relationship, is very vulnerable. And I think that Bantu-speaking people, heterosexuals, are as genetically vulnerable. But President Mbeki wasn't even open-minded about this because he saw only race and he saw stigma. And he stigmatized this disease because he said it is shameful to say that Africans have a sexually transmitted disease. Why is that shameful, ladies and gentlemen? That's the mistake he made. It wasn't shameful. He re-stigmatized this disease. And the most important thing that he did was that he refused to make treatment available. He said, this is not a disease that is virally or sexually transmitted. This is caused by poverty. He was terribly wrong. Because you can't treat poverty with medicine. But you can treat HIV with medicine. And I knew it. Because my life had been given back to me. So I couldn't keep quiet, even though I was a judge. I had to speak out about these terrible falsehoods that President Mbeki was disseminating. Terrible misconceptions and ignorances. But the most important thing that happened, we had a powerful president with a big majority at the head of a ruling party with a big majority, and we had a terrible doctrine of folly. But we had a constitution, and the Treatment Action Campaign took President Mbeki to court. And it's the most famous case, I think, in the last 18 years, and rightly so. I wasn't on the Constitutional Court then, but the Constitutional Court ruled that President Mbeki had to start making AIDS treatments available to people. The court ruling was about pregnant mothers. Very easy to stop a pregnant mother from transmitting the virus to her children, to a newborn infant. If you give her antiretroviral treatment, you give the newborn baby antiretroviral treatment. And the court said to President Mbeki, your policy for not giving this medication to these mothers is not reasonable. The Constitution requires the government to take reasonable measures to realize the right to health care. And that's a wonderful thing, ladies and gentlemen. What we've learned from AIDS is a lot of things. We've learned about medicine. We've learned about our own vulnerability as humans. We've learned about stigma. We've learned about activism against big corporations. But we've also learned about the rule of law. We've learned about how a policy can be examined under the microscope of reasonableness. And to President Mbeki's credit, he accepted the court's decision. He was reluctant, he was angry perhaps, but he accepted the court's decision. And that was a very important moment for our constitution and for our democracy. Because we know what happens when the government doesn't accept the court's decisions. We know from Swaziland, we know from Zimbabwe, where the rule of law is violated and disregarded. And to President Mbeki's credit and honor, he accepted the decision. And by the end of 2004, we had a national policy to give people to stop rolling out antiretroviral treatments. And I'm very happy to say that I'm now one of 1.7 million South Africans who are receiving these treatments. Some of them, like me, get them through our private medical insurance. The judge's medical aid pays for my treatments. Not very expensive anymore. It's a few $100 a month, 200 or 300 rand, 400 rand a month. But most people are getting it through the public health system. And I'm pleased to say, I can tell something about most of you. Most of you know someone who's on antiretrovirals. Can you put up your hands if you know someone who's taking ARVs? I'm very pleased to see your hands. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got in our country what the epidemiologists call a mature epidemic. And a mature epidemic is a very sad epidemic. It's a sad epidemic because all of us, every single one of us knows someone who has died of AIDS. Am I right? We all know someone who's died of AIDS. It's a family member, a loved one, a neighbor, a congregation member, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a brother or a sister or a parent or a child. That's a mature epidemic. And we're in the middle of a mature epidemic. And the one thing that happens in a mature epidemic is that the stigma starts to drop. And I'm very happy to say that people are talking about HIV. People are talking about it more. Do they talk about it at your school? Yes. I'm so pleased. Which is your school? So you're just up the hill. It's a wonderful school. Very nice to see you. So your teachers talk about it at a strict girls' school. That's beautiful. And your teachers talk about it. Which school are you? How do you say that? See, I love those pics. Can Professor Mabizela do those pics?
Good kids are trying.
Okay. Almost. So we are talking about it more, ladies and gentlemen, but we're still not talking about it enough. Why do I say that? Why have we got this day at Rhodes University? Why have we got all of you from the cold and the rain today to come and talk about it and think about it? We've got 1.7 million people on ARVs, but it's still not enough. We're still losing 200,000 people a year. 200,000 people a year. We lose 20,000 people a year to road traffic accidents, 18,000 people. But we lose 10 times that number to AIDS. And I can bet that each of you knows someone in your family or your neighborhood or your congregation or your union who is grappling with this issue, the issue that I spoke about, that sense of isolation and shame and fear. There's someone who's falling sick with HIV who doesn't want to be diagnosed. There's someone who's been diagnosed that doesn't want to go and get ARVs because the stigma is burdening them so hard. So we know from all these deaths that stigma is still too high because this is a manageable condition, ladies and gentlemen. 15 years after starting with ARVs, the scientists and the doctors tell me that my life expectation is just about the same as someone without HIV. Isn't that amazing? And that's the message we've got to get out. But we've also got to get out the message of prevention. Prevention, prevention, prevention. Do they talk about it at Victoria? I'm so proud of them. That's beautiful. That is very beautiful. Do they talk about it at your school as well? You're not allowed to laugh because I didn't say the school. But they talk about it at your school. I'm very pleased. Are you educated at school? We've got every day in our country, we've got 4,000 new infections with HIV, and we can't sustain that, ladies and gentlemen. It is difficult. It's not an easy thing. People say, why don't people just use condoms? Why don't they just start having safe sex? And people who say that don't understand the imperatives of health-seeking behavior. Because we've understood for 50 years. The first article that was published in a medical journal that said that there's a link between cancer and smoking was 1951. It was 61 years ago. 10 years later, the governments of North America and Western Europe accepted that there was a link between smoking and cancer. That was 50 years ago. Do you know how many people in the United States still smoke? How many? 18%. 1 in 5 of people in North America still smoke. So when people come to South Africa and say, why don't young people just use condoms? They don't understand. I ask them, why do 1 in 5 people in North America still smoke? Because it's difficult to make the right healthful choices each time. But we've got to get the message across. I'm not going to ask who's smokers here. Does anyone want to confess to being a smoker? Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Bye, Dr. Lilia. Ladies and gentlemen, I say that so that we understand the need for us to do this together, to talk about it. When I talk about the power of stigma and the fear of talking, I want to tell you a fact, and I don't want you to react to it. I'm not telling you this fact to make myself a hero. But the fact is, when I started talking about my HIV in 1999, after I got well, after I knew that my life was saved, after I knew that my life had been given back to me, I was confident that there'd be cabinet ministers, soccer stars, performers, public leaders, MECs, members of parliament who would also speak. Not a single one. We're still waiting for a leader anywhere in Africa to speak about their own HIV. Why is that? We know that cabinet ministers are living with this disease. We know that members of parliament and singers, entertainers are living with it. And it's because of the stigma. We can't force them to do it, but we can encourage them to do it. We can say to them, we're in this together. With prevention as well. We must talk about it on our playgrounds, in our classrooms, in our lecture theatres, at our halls of residence. Let's talk about this together. Let us understand stigma. Let us understand prevention. Let us understand the need for treatment together. Because we really can do it. Let us encourage each other to be tested. We've come so long in this HIV epidemic. I spoke to you about what we've learned from it. We've learned about medicine. We've learned about society and stigma. We've learned about social activism. We've learned about the rule of law. We've learned all these beautiful lessons. And the most important lesson is the lesson of social solidarity. The lesson that we can deal with a massive problem. Do you know that we're in a worrying stage of our country's development? 18 years after democracy. Workers are angry. Mine workers are angry. We're undergoing a period of turmoil in union representation. We've got difficult issues of politics and political leadership before us. It's a difficult period, but what does the AIDS epidemic show us? President Mbeki's health minister, Dr. Mati Chabalala Msimang, said we can't have ARVs in Africa because people won't know how to take their ARVs. He said they haven't got watches. Have you got watches, ladies and gentlemen? Of course, our speakers got watches. It was a silly thing to say.
Yeah.
It was a silly
Why
thing
don't you
to
buy
say.
them
You
watches?
should never have said it. Because we've got this beautiful, we've got the best ARV program in the world. We're a developing country, and we overcame this issue. We're not yet there yet, but we've shown how we can do it. And the point I want to make is that if we could get the world's biggest ARV program going, if we could get the biggest coverage in cell phones on the continent of Africa, we can overcome much bigger problems. And that's the ultimately hopeful lesson of this epidemic. It's an epidemic of sadness, it's an epidemic of bereavement, it's an epidemic of fear, it's an epidemic of loss, but it's also an epidemic of hope. And that's why you've come today. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Justice Cameron is happy to answer questions, but before he answers them, I would really encourage you to buy a wonderful book, Witness to AIDS. I bought it soon after it had been published. Absolutely moving personal account that Justice Cameron presented in that book. Please get a copy. It is very important. It is a must read for every person. If you have a question, please put up your hand. Yes, at the back.
Thanks, Doctor. I want to know to Mr. Cameron, why the government they provide us this condom, choice condom, the government condom, instead to buy that condom to give us free. And that one is free, but the government sent us a free condom. He wants to fulfill us alive. Why they get us not right condom?
Oh, the condom's not right here.
It's not right, that one, the choice one. And they, when you go to the shop to buy the condom, free. Like Castanova condom.
Are you saying that the government condom is inferior? Can I tell you something, sir? And I want to make a promise to you. I want to make a promise to you. As a personal, someone with HIV, and as a judge, those government condoms are not inferior. They're as good as the ones that you will go and buy in the shop. Those government condoms are the ones in the yellow pack with the silver on the back. They're good condoms, and they protect you, and you must use them. And you must tell everyone those condoms are good. Please. Please be a messenger for the use of those condoms.
Thank you. I mean, just speaking on this book that I really love, and I actually wrote my history essay on it. And I would like to add on that. I mean, I've read, wonderful books by that deal with the issue of HIV and AIDS, South Africa, for instance, Dennis Stanford's Biggest Affairs and the AIDS Survivors, which was a wonderful book. And I think one of the best ways that we can actually deal with this issue or have high levels of empathy, how we, negotiate it in a country in business is we need to tell stories, we need to speak about it. And I think literature is one of the best ways to do that. But at the same time, that requires a different kind of education and deeply humane education. Because from your book, from this private book, you look at extraordinary human beings. And I just wonder, as students who are at university, how does one come to be so humane, so understanding of other people's positions? Why is it something that we have in our education system? Because I think it's the only way we get in which we can get to understand each other, just a very humane approach to things. And generally in other cases, I think that is what we need if we can address those complexity.
The best questions always come from a man in a hoodie. Thank you very much. But I think, can I just say, Ms. Magazela, I think it is the power of sharing. When you give compliments to those books, it's just because we can share each other's stories. I can ask these young people here for the stories from their families. We could create an occasion where they will tell us how this epidemic has affected them. And if we respect their stories and treasure their stories enough, they would have as much power. So thank you for what you said.
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor. Justice Cameron, you moved, I suppose, as a judge in the higher echelon of the society, and in your presentation, you've been very vocal in criticizing our former president, Thabo Mbeki, about his stance on HIV and AIDS. I just want to know, without putting you on the spot, have you ever had a one-to-one conversation with him, and what was his reaction? What did he say to you?
Well, you must put me on the spot.
Yeah.
That's why there's questions.
That conversation you had with him one-on-one.
I knew President Mbeki in exile because we went and visited the ANC twice before the de Klerk reforms, and I met him there, and I met him afterwards. I met him at an official meeting as deputy president. But I only met him twice after this controversy. The one was at Dr. Nzado Mutana's 80th birthday party, and we didn't talk. But the other was at a funeral. I met him at Professor Tobias's funeral, and we didn't get a chance to talk. We greeted each other with courtesy. But I would like to ask him those questions. But I don't know what his answer is. So I've never had that opportunity. Thank you for putting me on the spot.
Judge Cameron, this question is going to be, I think, a little bit difficult to answer, but
that's good.
As Dr. Mabizela mentioned, there is a student-run organization, SHARK, and what I would like to know is how, with the way that students are very ignorant towards getting tested in HIV and the whole point of HIV, how do we go about encouraging our peers to actually wake up and realize that this is an urgent situation, like this is a crisis? Like, what is it that we could do differently? Because as SHARK, we go out of our way to make sure that students are aware of this. And as much as there is light at the end of the tunnel, it's also a very scary situation that affects and infects everybody. So what is it that we could do differently to actually wake up rodents to see that this is a crisis?
Well, can I just say, don't be too hard on yourselves, because I think you're doing a lot. I think that SHARK has got a long history. SHARK has got a history back to 2004, 2005, and I think it's done a lot. I think it's one of the most effective campus HIV organizations. So don't knock yourself. But can I just deal with two issues regarding women's health? Because they're also intimate issues. How many women here check for lumps in their breasts? That's right. And how many women have had pap smears taken? These are essential things for women's health. And we talk about them. And when you talk, do you talk to your friends about having lumps in their breasts? Do you talk about it? That's what we've got to do. I want to tell you about my friend Molobatsi Shongwe, who was diagnosed with breast cancer. And you know what she did? She sent a text to all her friends from her doctor's office. And she said, I've got breast cancer. And what did we do? We went and saw her. We sent her texts. We sent her emails. She raised a fund. That's where we've got to get HIV, so that someone can say, without being ashamed, I've been diagnosed with HIV, like Molobati. I've got a lump in my breast, and the doctors just told me now that it's malignant. And I'm letting you know because I want your solidarity. So what SHARK is doing is right. You've got to talk about it. We mustn't be shy. I went and spoke to a state organization a few months ago called Mintec. And it was mostly the workers of Mintec, 500 workers of Mintec. And they asked me, what can we do about it? It's a similar question. And I said, do you know someone in your neighborhood, or in your union, or in your congregation, or in your family, who you think has got HIV? This was a shop steward who got up. And he said yes. So I said, why don't you ask that person if they've had the test? And everyone laughed. They said, we can't do that. So I stopped the audience. I said, why can't we do that? And the gentleman got up and he said, they will think we are accusing them. Am I right? Why will I accuse you? If I say to you, ma'am, have you had an HIV test? Why am I accusing you? Have you had an HIV test? Why am I accusing you? If I ask you, ma'am, have you looked for a lump in your breast? Am I accusing you? I'm not accusing you. So we've got to take that further. You're on the right path, but we've got to take it further. I'm not accusing you if I ask you to have an HIV test. I'm loving you. I'm supporting you. I'm saying you are my brother and my sister, and I care for you. Let's get that message out.
Thank you.
Besides taking antiretrovirals, what else do you need to do to look after your condition, and are the issues of side effects? And also, is your capacity affected in any way when it comes to exercising, work, and so on? Like would it be for somebody who's got diabetes, for instance, or some other disease there?
It's a wonderful question, ladies and gentlemen. Let's take all the components of it. Side effects. If you start on ARVs, you've got to be careful for side effects. And when I started on ARVs, my doctor started me with very strong ARVs, including a protease inhibitor, which made my tummy work, and I got some perioral neuropathy. Nowadays, the doctors start people on wonderful two drugs called Truvada in one tablet, and they start them on either Stockrem or Nevirapine. So you take 2 tablets once a day with 3 drugs in it. Those drugs have very few side effects, and very few people get side effects. But you've got to be careful. If you don't get side effects, especially a rash, go back to the clinic straight away. But the drugs, the first line regimen has got very few side effects, and very few people have side effects. The second thing that you ask about is this thing of other supplements and wellnesses. And there's nothing else you need to take. We didn't know. At the time President Mbeki was casting his doubts about ARVs, we didn't know that they would work in rural communities, urban communities, suburbs, townships. They work. It's better to have nutrition, it's better to have EPUB, to have Pronutro, but ARVs work. What's our time for this?
We'll take 2 questions, one from Elena.
But I want to make a last point. As far as once you're on the right combination, this is easier than diabetes, it's easier than high blood pressure. It's easier to manage, it's an easier disease to manage than those. And in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to do my third 94.7 and my 7th August next year. So I don't want to. I'm just saying to you, I'm a long-distance endurance cyclist, and that's how I keep well. And my lifespan is the same as someone without HIV. That's the message I want to give out.
Yeah. Elena?
Jack Cameron, I don't mean to dwell on the Mbeki issue, but do you think that his reaction to this whole epidemic thing was a sign of ignorance or not being educated enough about the virus, or is it something else?
No, it wasn't ignorance or lack of education, it was stigma. He couldn't accept that this virus was sexually transmitted. Because this difficult issue in our country of race together with sex. Race and sex are potent. And when we're talking about black sexuality, that's what put President Mbeki on the wrong track. It wasn't. He's a very, very clever man, a learned man, but he got onto a desperately wrong track here. Thank you.
The very last question from Mr. Fahey.
An issue I think that we'd like to discuss here is because there's so much of insecurity around the whole issue of stigma. Is there any way everyone listening here can take away how do you actually negotiate and mediate the issue of before you have sexual transmission with a partner or any, especially on student level, saying, have you tested? How can I do about it? What is a 1, 2, 3 stop go, amber stop go? That's a lesson that we can all take away from here, please.
I think the more we generalize it, the question is about safe sex, negotiating safe sex, and it's difficult, but you've got to do it. You bring it in conversation. Have you tested? When did you last test? We shouldn't even be asking, have you tested? The question should be, for anyone over 14, should be, when was your last test? And that's the way we've got to make it, we've got to normalize it. The theme about HIV is normalization. Breast cancer, insulin-dependent diabetes, high blood pressure, you check for all of those, you check for HIV. With intimate relationships, you talk about it right away. And we normalize it. The more we normalize it in all our social discourses, the more we'll normalize it also in our intimate discourses. Thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you. Could I ask that the study to offer a vote of thanks?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mandela. Just a few words of thanks. Justice Cameron, we cannot thank you enough for the most interesting and inspiring talk. I think what really stood out for me is how real you